I'm still adjusting my camera. It's never the right angle. Yep.
It's the perfectionist in us, right? Always tweaking.
And I'm not actually. My life's motto is that doing is more important than doing it perfectly.
It's a great way to be. I think that'll go exactly into the conversation we're about to start right now, right?
Absolutely. So let me get us started. Let me get us started with Welcome to Empowered Women series. This is where we talk to aspiring women leaders like you. And I am very excited about this conversation, especially because one, I have never spoken to a naval pilot. I have never ever spoken to a White House advisor for counterterrorism or for cybersecurity. I have always run away from, as you can imagine, I have always run away from head of my school. So
I'm everyone's principal around here these days, I suppose. It's okay. But we'll have fun. I promise.
yeah. And I always wanted to talk to all of them. And lucky me, I get all of those in one person. So thank you for, and I should have asked you this question before talking to you because I have always, called you Marisa, but I would like to address you as Dr. Porges.
Yes, thank you.
That's the right pronunciation?
Porges. Yes, perfect.
Porges. Okay. I just, yeah. And so, welcome, Dr. Porges. And thank you once again for giving us your time and your willingness to train us on boldness. I know I can use a lot of boldness in dark areas that I don't talk about. Like, a lot of us do appear bold, but there are areas for each one of us where we can use some help. And that's what we are looking for from you. Do you want to say anything before I ask you lots and lots of questions?
I just want to say how excited I am to be here, Purnima, and to everyone listening today for what I agree is an important conversation because boldness is, I think, personally important, but difficult. Because it requires us pushing our limits. And it's no better time to start thinking about how we can push ourselves than at the start of a new year, when we're really leaning into what I hope will be a fantastic new chapter for everyone. And I wanted to say thank you for holding this space for women everywhere, because I think that's part of this, is how we can help each other be our boldest self. So excited to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. My first question is, what do you mean by being bold? Like when you're talking about being bold? What?
Yeah. Well, and it's a great question. And because we throw these terms around so much: boldness, courage, resilience. And then when you think about it, you're like, well, what does that mean? What is that going to look like on a daily basis? And I think for me, and for the purpose of our conversation, it's this idea of, taking action that can be risky. Having the skill set and leaning into things that push our limits. And this is where the conversation can become really personal, because pushing those limits and taking the risks can be in a professional sphere or a personal sphere, but it can mean almost anything. It can be about, speaking up at meetings when that's not really the space you find yourself taking the risk of being outspoken, being vocal. It can be about trying new things, trying new career paths. It can be about being bolder in your personal life and really thinking about, well, what risk do I want to take next? Maybe it's a risk about how you're parenting or how you're balancing, and balancing is a tricky word. It's never really balancing, but managing both work and personal life in a way that feels right to you. All those things define for me boldness, because it's really about pushing yourself individually in a way that feels right. And I think it's something that women in particular should talk about more and more, so that we can help each other lean into it, particularly, again, as we're thinking of a new year when there's still so many challenges we're each facing together.
Thank you. Thank you. That gave me, I have my next question in front of me, but what you said gave a rise to So you are saying it is about being active participant in your life, being a person who does things rather than a person to whom the things are done to.
Mhm.
Huh. That.
Yeah. Well, I think it's about, for me, I always hear the word resilience, courage, boldness. And particularly when I was writing the book, which is sort of what made us, how we got connected. And the research that I did for the book really helped me realize that I'd long talked about these ideas, but never fully understood how to put them into action in a daily way. And I think there are specific skills that we as individuals, but particularly as women, can leverage to empower ourselves to be bold, right? It's this idea of how we speak up, how we ask and negotiate, how we communicate and collaborate, how we problem solve. Little things that every day are the skill sets that help us take those actions. And so to your point, it becomes an action verb, not just a descriptor of who we are.
Yes. And do you have an example? Do you have an example when you went against your personality? I'm sure you must have had areas of your life and personality where you aren't bold. Did
Yeah.
you go against your personality and try to be bold?
Wow. So definitely. So I'll start with, because I think, there's the positive stories of like when it worked, and then there's going to be the stories of like it doesn't work for all of us at any moment, right? Those moments where you're just like, nope, not happening. And I'll get to that in a minute. But let's start with the positive. I suppose we can share those stories first, even as and because it's related. I think one of the moments when I was able to tap into my boldest self. And this is going to be a bit of a crazy one because it gets to that work that you spoke about, that I had done in the counterterrorism sphere, the job that I had before my current job. I'm currently the head of a girls' school. So I run a girls' school called the Boldness School outside of Philadelphia for young women ages 4 years old to 18. So the span of, early childhood education up to when they go off to college.
I want to say something. That sounds like the most bold thing to do.
For anyone who remembers their own youth, yes, there is that. So put that and put a pandemic overlaying on it. There is that, and yet I have such a supportive community and a wonderful team here and fantastic teachers that it's really just more fun than anything. But before this, my life prior, which you mentioned, was in the national security sphere. I flew for the Navy because that had been my childhood dream. And then I was doing counterterrorism research in the Middle East and Afghanistan as part of, that chapter of my life. And so one of the most boldest moments for myself personally and professionally came out of that. And while it's going to sound crazy, and it's the story that I took years to tell my mother about, because it speaks to a moment when I was interviewing an Al-Qaeda terrorist or a former Al-Qaeda leader who'd been the senior recruiter in Yemen. And it's going to sound crazy, and yet it'll come down to a moment that is relatable for all of us. Because what ended up happening was I ended up having breakfast with this individual to interview him about what his path to joining Al-Qaeda had been, how he ended up had been in Tora Bora with Osama bin Laden back. And we had these moments where I was hearing his story. But over time, we started to personally connect. And we reached a point in the conversation where he started asking questions about me, about my personal background, about my family life, about my religious background. And here we are sitting in the center of Sana'a, which, for those who aren't aware, the capital of Yemen, a war-torn country in the midst of major conflict, just shortly after an Al-Qaeda attack. And I was with my interpreter, and not, the best situation as a single American female who happens to be Jewish, all those things. And yet I took a moment when he asked about my religion, and he pushed me. He wanted to know more about my religion, more about my family. And I shared with him my personal story about growing up as a Jewish American woman, what it meant, what my family life is like. And at the time, my interpreter was horrified, looking at me aghast, scared, worried what was going to happen next. And again, it was a moment of, for me, personal vulnerability in a physical way as well. And it was a moment when I connected with this individual in a way that surprised even me and definitely surprised him. And from that point in the conversation, the rest of our conversation changed. We were able to make progress and have a very open conversation together about national security, terrorism, things that are very difficult. Now, I say that not because of just the amazing, fun, kind of crazy story about, being a researcher in Yemen, speaking to former terrorists, things like that, which is all in my book. So please pick it up, because that's what, some of the stories I share in the book. But because really the moment that mattered about being bold was being vulnerable. And I think that is something we can all do each and every day, and something that particularly for women can be our superpower, right? Because I think that we relate to others differently than a lot of our male peers. I think we work in teams differently because of it. And I think it can make us bold and courageous and really impactful and powerful when we figure out how to tap into our own vulnerabilities in thoughtful, strategic ways to maximum effect. So I'll use it as a way to say, right, vulnerability can be a real strength and can make us our boldest self.
Yeah, and in Empowered Women, we always continue to say that, and that is the main reason behind Empowered Women, which is women don't need to lead like men.
Mm-hmm.
We need to use our own strengths, our own natural traits that have come out of the way we have been raised for generations.
Exactly.
And your point about our boldness lies in our vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my difficult words, and it takes me boldness to pronounce that one. Yeah. This is a reminder. There's a question here, and that is a reminder for everyone who is listening to us. Please continue to ask questions to Dr. Porges, because, I have a long list of questions, but I want to make sure that I get your questions in also. And this question is from Zach, and he is asking, how do you create the personal connection with the person you were interviewing?
Yeah.
Were you actively trying to connect, or did it come naturally?
Thank you, Zach, for asking, because I think, and this speaks to, I'll speak a little bit to how personally I approached it, but also how I think we can all think about building connections in ways that feel natural. Over time, I realized that, again, to use Purnima's words, like my power as a woman was slightly different than if I'd been a male researcher. It was about making connections through talking about family in ways that felt comfortable. Interestingly enough, I oftentimes showed pictures to relate to the person across the table. It was also because I was conscious of the fact that in the Middle East and Afghanistan and the places I was working at the time, there weren't very many women who were engaging these conversations. And so the men mostly who I interviewed and talked with related to me slightly differently, as a sister, as a cousin, as maybe an aunt, maybe as someone who was a female family member, and they wanted to understand me through those terms. So I was actively trying for that connection, but I was doing it in a way that felt naturally and comfortably for me. Right. And so the moment that I'll say, how did I make it feel natural and comfortable, was I actually would carry around in my purse on my iPhone pictures of my pet. Because when there was little children in the room with us, sometimes I would meet in people's family, in their living rooms or sort of in their homes. And oftentimes I'd have children come up and want to connect with me. And with the language barrier in particular, sometimes it was difficult. But everyone can relate to a pet, a cat, a dog, some cute picture of your children. And I would show them pictures, and we would relate through that lens. And I think finding something particular to you that allows you to show a little bit of yourself in a way that feels comfortable helps you do what you were saying, make it feel natural, but allow you to strategically try for it, because it's advantageous for us all, and there's nothing wrong with that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You can finish your thought. I'm so excited to hear that. And I was like, yes. So,
well, but it's an important thing to remember, because particularly when we're thinking about how we use vulnerability as an advantage to help connect and to help show our empathy and build teams through the lens of empathetic leadership. I think sometimes, particularly for women, it feels risky. It feels nerve-wracking. How are we going to do it in a way that isn't too vulnerable, that doesn't feel emotional, that doesn't sort of seen as a negative. And this is where we can pick the things that feel comfortable. For me at the time, it was my pets. It sounds silly now. I have to say now that I have a young baby, a son, it's him. I love talking about the stories that involve him, and not all of them. Some of them are too personal, but there's ones that help me help me connect with my audience, help me show the vulnerable moments where being a mom of a young toddler is difficult. We can all relate to that, or many of us. And so I think for women, it's about remembering that it's okay to be vulnerable, but we can pick and choose what feels right to us, and it will help you connect, lead, empathize, all those things that will lead to you being bold.
Yeah. And when we use our natural abilities and natural ways of doing things to do things, the effects are long lasting. Like we can build something that is not natural part of our, the way we have been brought up, or our natural personality. But I have, in my experience, I have seen that it doesn't stick with me for a long time. It's like a makeup. It just falls off once I'm home. So
what a great analogy, this idea of it being makeup that we have to continually remind, or maybe have to put it in each morning to remind ourselves. So I actually have a trick here for you, Purnima, and that might help other people too, because I do think that we do have to push ourselves, remind ourselves to continually practice these skills we're talking about. And sometimes I make a game of it. I literally, sometimes when I realize that I'm not being my boldest, and for me, occasionally it's about how you use your voice in a meeting, particularly a meeting where maybe you're one of the only women, if not the only woman. Maybe you're younger than the rest of those in the room. Maybe you're a different race or a different background, or coming at it and feel just outside the circle. And so it's harder for, I say this, there is a gender difference here that's sometimes harder for, once we earn a seat at the table, for women to effectively not just earn the seat, but use it, speak up. I sometimes make a game of it. I sometimes say, nope, I'm going to 2 times. I usually, one seems too many, 1 seems too few, 3 seems too lot, but 2 just right. Say, okay, what am I going to say twice this meeting to make sure my voice is heard? And it practices that muscle memory. It's the act of putting the makeup on. It's the act of practicing the things that over time then become natural. Because I do think there's something that comes with practicing those skills we're talking about now that, over time, the muscle memory sets in and we remember it. And so one day it will not feel like makeup. It'll just be who we are.
that does, and unless you do it, you won't be able to do it. So you have to build the courage of doing it at some point.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it only if you do it. Otherwise, you would never know what you are capable of.
Yep.
If you believed, it's like math for most lot of us, wherein we have been told the stories that you're not good at numbers, or we believe that because we are women we are not good at numbers, and if we believe that story and never try that, it would be difficult for us to ever do it, and we will never know how good we were at math.
Exactly. And I really do believe that practice, little moments, daily moments of practice make an incredible difference in making bold an action, an active verb. That being bold then becomes something we do every day when we practice it. And I can speak to that through the lens of the girls at my school, because I've seen it in action. I've seen them be bold in ways that candidly shock me from the lens of, gosh, they're just teenagers, they're just kids. And one story that speaks out, or sticks out for me rather, is when 2 of the teenagers at my school, high schoolers, were harassed at an area campus. Right? They're about 16, 17 years old, juniors in high school, and were walking back rather to the parking lot after a meeting, and some employees on this campus started sexually harassing them, calling after them, commenting on their body, commenting on what they were wearing and what things they wanted to do to them. All those moments that we're fearful of for our young women, and that candidly a lot of women have experienced, whether it's in college or just on the street or things like that. And fortunately, these girls protected themselves. They ran to the waiting car where one of their mothers was and said, they got out of it. And yet, once they recovered, once they sort of got over their fear and the immediacy of the moment, what happened next was what just said, gosh, this is bold action. This is what took practice, though. They pulled out their phones and emailed the president of this college, a middle-aged white male who they didn't know very well, but they knew who he was. And they wrote the most eloquent, thoughtful message that said, "Dear sir, we want to report something." They described exactly what happened. And then they completed the message by saying, "We hope that you have sexual harassment training for your employees. If you don't, we'd love to talk with you about it because we have some suggestions." Within 36 hours, they were in a meeting with this gentleman, his head of security and his head of HR. Their parents hadn't even heard about it yet, one of them. And when I asked these 16-year-old girls later, after the fact, how did you do that? 25, 1 out of 4, in college, only 1 out of 4 incidents of that nature are reported by individuals who are 20 years old and above. And here we have teenagers who couldn't even parallel park or go out on dates. And they were taking this bold action. And one of them said, "Yeah, it's not something that comes easily to me. But I can remember when I was a kid and my dad made me order pizza. He made me pick up the phone and order pizza when our family had pizza dinners. Not my twin brother, not my mother, but me." And she admitted she hated it. It was not her thing. She didn't like speaking up and speaking out. But over time, she got used to it. And so it wasn't something that she enjoyed doing or was comfortable with, but it was muscle memory. So that years later, she was like, "Okay, I know how to do this. I feel comfortable taking bold action," in this case, speaking out, sending an email, defending herself in a professional way. But again, she herself said, in retrospect, it was because I practiced it for many years from an early age. So Purnima, I fully agree. You're right. It's about those little things we do each day to build the muscle memory.
Yeah. And Dr. Porges, there's another thing that I noticed in that email. A lot of us, when we face a challenge and we write such kind of protest emails or protest things, we only talk about problem. And these young women, girls, they talked about a solution. How awesome is that? Like, you not only talk about the challenge, but say that, if you don't know the solution, I have a solution for you.
It's such a, thank you for pointing that out. And it's a new lens on it that even after writing the stories in the book and having so many of these conversations, you're the first to mention in that way. But I think you're right, because it's about how we as women are problem solvers. And interestingly, social science research says that we are actually more effective problem solvers for these sorts of group problem solving scenarios, things that require multiple dimensions of input and information than anybody. It's actually been borne out in research. And so here we have, again, something that is our superpower, how we help solve problems. And if we think about it in those terms, it can really help us be, again, actively bold.
Yep, totally. And now, Dr. Porges, I want to test your vulnerability by
Here it comes, right?
Both your stories gave me goosebumps. Your Al Qaeda individual story gave me major goosebumps, and even more goosebumps when you talked about those teenage girls, because it was an experience I could relate to really deeply, and something that I would have never done, those girls did. Mm-hmm. So now I want to hear a story where you tried to be bold and didn't work out so good.
Yeah. It's, these are those moments where we all have them. And I think it's so important that we share them with each other as women. So thank you for asking. And I'll speak to one that in some ways, it speaks to a pivotal moment in my career, right? This moment where I, after many years, had worked so hard and I had reached my next dream had been to work in the White House in the West Wing. And I was serving in the last administration and had the good fortune of having a meeting with President Obama. My first meeting where I got to sit with the leader of the free world around a small table with a couple of colleagues and talk about the issues of the day. Literally that moment you joke about, well, if you're stuck in the elevator with the leader of the free world, what do you say? And I'd gotten there, right? I had earned my seat at the table. And I spent the entire hour with him there. We were talking about national security, foreign policy issues that I'd worked for years on, both in government and in academia. And when I left the room, I realized that I hadn't said a word the entire time. Right. So here we have this idea, and here I think I'm empowered. I have voice. That is what I'm known for. And, in some ways people say, oh gosh, he talks a lot, won't stop talking. And yet here in my, made it career moment, I kept having this narrative in the back of my head. Oh, I'll talk, I'll get the next one. Oh, my colleague, he knows this answer. I'll let him have it. He hasn't had his moment. No, I will cede the room to other people. In retrospect, shrunk into myself. I did exactly, I did exactly not what I say I should do, right? How do I speak twice in a moment in a meeting? How do I make sure that I'm not just at the table, but effectively part of the conversation? And it's, I will say that it was a moment where I was not my boldest, where I did not lean on the muscle memory of actively being bold. I'm fortunate that I was able to make up for it in a later meeting and a later moment with President Obama. And yet still to this day, I think back on that time and I think, gosh, it's not the example I want to set for the girls at my school or other young women, but I also know it's a moment that it feels really real to me. And I think we've all had it. Yep. Not maybe that version of it, but that moment where we didn't act our boldest. We didn't speak up for ourselves. We didn't ask for what we need. Maybe we didn't negotiate for our salary in as we should have. Or maybe we didn't say no to something that was being asked of us when we knew maybe this is the time to say no, not yes, right? We all have those moments. And gosh, I think I have plenty of them too, but that's the one that sticks out for me when you ask that question.
And we have those moments, not just, you had a really big one. Talk about, having big one. If that ever happens to me, I'm going to remember your story and I'm going to write it on my palm, a number 2.
Yep.
So, I hope I remember to look at my palm though. I don't promise you that.
No, well, hey, just to know walking in the room that's an important way to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And but we all of us have those could have, should have moments where we have regrets every evening. Like, oh my God, that meeting. And it's one of the main reasons most women have sleepless nights is thinking about why didn't I say this? Why I could have said this? I should have done this and said that. And
yeah,
I think it is small. Although it has a bigger impact in our life, in a smaller scale, it's about being able to sleep peacefully at night for yourself.
Yeah, gosh, such a nice way to think about it, right? Because while we think about it in the professional terms of how we're advancing our career, how we sort of, being our best, boldest self, but you're right. It's really just about making sure every night when we look back on our day, we can think, I tried my hardest. I took the risk I needed to. I was, actively practicing that muscle memory of being bold, but then also realizing that it's not going to work every time. And we need to be okay with that. Right. So much about taking risk and being bold is being okay with the moments when it doesn't work, when we fundamentally fail, when, the daily time you think you're going to give a perfect talk or write the perfect email and it just goes wrong, or when you don't speak up, or when you try to speak up and it's just off. Right. We all have that. And that's okay, too, because I still think it's better that we tried.
Yep. Yeah. I have lesser regrets about things that I actually say. And I do that many times. I do say wrong things at wrong time. And I have lesser regrets for those than not saying things. Or not.
Yep. And I think that's such an important lesson for all of us to hear and remind ourselves of. And then to say, okay, I'm going to leave it on the table. right? I'm going to take risk, even if risk means failure. I know that we all know that's a better way to be. I mean, it's how you succeed. Succeed means building on failures. That's what success is made of. But it's a hard thing to do in real life. So I love, Purnima, that you're sharing that, because we need to be candid with each other as women in particular, and remind ourselves that that's okay. That's part of it. That's part of this whole process. That's life.
I have one more question, which is, you talked about those teenage girls, and when we see, younger generation, women in their 30s and 40s, when we see younger generation, and when we see them have being raised differently and having way more courage, boldness, and resilience than us, many times it feels like, are we late to the party? Like, can we develop these kinds of qualities now, or we just are too late for it?
I think it's a lifelong path towards being better, being our best self. So I'm still working on it. And even as we see our youngsters, I do agree, being bolder. Excuse me, am I still?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Sorry, apologies. And I think that the reality is it's a lifelong process that we want to continue to improve on, and that they'll hit. There's going to be moments for us all where we realize, oh, we should have done this differently, been our best self. How do we work on it? And so I think as young adults, as adults, it's about having candid conversations with each other about what those moments will look like, and figuring out how we practice those things that we need to improve on. I think, for example, that the ability to communicate empathetically, to be vulnerable, to use that as your most empowering leadership skill, is something for all of us to work on at every stage of life. And in fact, my book, which, I know that, we started the conversation with in the beginning, it's really geared at doing that for all ages. While it's something that we can start for the next generation when they're 10 and 12 and 14, it's something that all of us can think about and do at any stage of life. So I agree that it's something we should all work on, but I don't think it means we're late to the party at all.
Oh, thank you. That is very encouraging to know. And with that, I want to ask, what is it that we can do? You mentioned that although the younger generation seems to be bolder than us, I'm sure they also have their dark corners. They also have
Mm-hmm.
areas where they are not bold, courageous, and resilient. How can we help them? How can we make the next generation of women?
Yeah, and I think what we're doing right now, this conversation, this podcast, this engaging each other in the real stories of life is part of it. I think the reality is that a lot of the hurdles that we as women, as young women, have faced are going to still be there for the next generation. I mean, the fact of the matter is, it's still true that only 5% of CEOs are women, that the pay gap still means women make 81 cents on the dollar compared to a man for the same job, that women in professional settings are interrupted more than men are. All these things are still true. And I think it helps when we talk candidly about them, about those daily hurdles we face, and how we overcome them. I think that's part of what we're doing right now through this conversation, Purnima, to make sure we empower others, but set the stage for the next generation to be ready for what's coming. Even as we're trying to change the system, for sure. I think it's, a realistic look of how we, look out for each other, so to speak. I also think as part of it, it's really about building a team of support for one another with the next generation in mind. One thing that I love seeing here at Baldwin is how much our girls learn to lean in and lean on each other. It's a very different concept than I think a lot of times we think of. It happens in all women's environments, because it's not about competing with each other, against each other, rather. It's about competing alongside, right? As in, we are helping each other compete better with the outside world or with the world around us. And I do think helping to remind both each other and the next generation that part of what this is about is leaning on each other, that none of us are alone. None of us are going to get there without one another. None of us are going to get there without failure along the way, but by pairing those moments of failure with a team around you, you can make sure you can build on it and succeed in the long term. So those are the two things that come to mind when we talk about the next generation in particular.
Yes, I agree with you on all of those because it took me a long time in my life to learn that I could ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
Your career is not just, you're not, you don't need to live your life and career alone. You don't need to get everything done alone. You can ask for help, and people do help when you ask for it. And it takes a village for everything, and each one of us do have our villages.
Yes. But it's an interesting thing when you think statistically speaking, women aren't as effective as asking for help. And I think in part because we don't admit that it's part of what we need to do as a skill set. And that not only is it a skill we need to rely on, it's a skill that will make us stronger and more bold, right? It's not something that makes us vulnerable. It's a strength to ask effectively, to rely on one another, and to, in the same way we might want to negotiate for a salary, we want to negotiate for what our daily life should look like, right? All those things are really important skills for us to practice.
Yeah, and going back to, the most important thing you talked about is being vulnerable, being able to talk about your own challenges shamelessly, because understanding that we are all human, we all have weirdness and challenges.
Mhm.
And let's just talk more about them, talk about everything so that and get help for everything.
Yeah. Well, and it's particularly useful to think that this is actually, again, and when you look at research, this is a leadership skill that is being more and more valued by employers, by teams, by companies than ever before. This idea that empathy, communicating, building teams through vulnerability is actually even something that corporations are hiring for and training for. So here we can turn the concept on our head, this age-old concept that it's a vulnerability, not a strength. We think, no, it's actually something we should speak about and say, yeah, no, this is what I'm good at. I am good at, taking other people's perspectives into account. I am good at making connections through my own vulnerability. It makes me a more effective leader. I am good at, therefore, asking for help, right? Asking for help in a team is what helps make a team move forward, right? That's really about solving the group's problems. I think when we think differently about these ideas, it really, again, becomes our strength and helps us actively be bold, turning boldness into that active verb that we talked about early on.
Do your girls know how lucky they are to have you as head of their school? I mean, the biggest problem in academia that I see is the connection with the real world, like making the skills and everything that you're learning, being able to making it applicable in real world in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And you are building it up so well. You're building it up from their core and helping them build it inside out.
Well, I'm fortunate to have a huge team here that makes it happen. And I do think it's the power that comes with being a school that is focused on building women as leaders, as change makers, so it's part of the education. It's part of what our teachers do every day in terms of how they're thinking about encouraging, our girls to speak up, right? What are you doing in a class each and every day to make sure the girls practice from age 4 and 5 years old speaking up? It's horrifying to know that in a co-ed environment, studies have shown girls speak out less often than boys. But if you take that same young girl and you move her into a co-ed setting, rather a single sex setting, she will speak out as often as her male peer did in the other classroom. And, just knowing that helps us, again, you in your workplace, Purnima, me here at school, but in any place that our listeners are, realize we need to look out for each other as women, right? We need to amplify what each other is saying. We need to help each other with our asks. We need to help each other practice the actions of being bold. So I think it's an idea that you can take out of the school environment where we're thinking about it for the next generation, for, school age and young women. And it can be about how we run our teams, how we run our meetings, how you run, your collaborative projects in your own workplace. So I think for everyone listening, it's really about what we're doing individually, but how we're bringing that to the table for, both our professional spheres and our personal lives.
Absolutely. And I want to ask, you did touch upon your book little here and there. I want you to just tell us quickly about the book so that we, when we pick up the book and we read it, we know what to look for and what to expect.
Well, thank you for saying so. The book, What Girls Need: How to Raise Bold, Courageous, Resilient Women, was written with the girls that I teach at school in mind. Right, it grew out of conversations I was having with the students at my school, and when they were thinking about not just what happens in college, but what happens in the real world and how they prepare for that. And I realized that those conversations, which really pulled from my own personal stories in the Navy, you know, when I was working in the White House, when I was working overseas in Afghanistan and Yemen and other places, and also the stories of my female peers, right? Women that I work with in the Pentagon, women that I serve with in the military, and women that I come to know in Hollywood and in other environments too. And the lessons that we had learned over time, or the lessons that we realized we were missing. And I think that's part of it, right? What lessons that I wish I had when I was, you know, first in the workplace, first negotiating my, you know, first salary, first at the table with the leader of the free world, whatever that looks like. And so it's a book where it combined personal stories, stories from, you know, other female leaders, as well as the girls at my school, and social science research to talk about what skills we can each practice every day to ensure we are developing our boldest self, we are being most courageous, we are being most resilient. So it talks to the things that we talked about today, Purnima, this idea of how we communicate, how we empathize, how we be most adaptable, how we problem solve, specifically in a way that research shows fits best, feels best for women, but in a way that, you know, will make us most effective. So I look forward to hearing from your listeners about the lessons and the advice in the book to see how it works for each of you in your daily life, so we can continue doing this for more women around the world.
And what do we have to do to get a signed copy?
Oh my goodness. So the book is available on Amazon, at Barnes and Nobles, wherever, on Porchlight, wherever you buy a book. And my website, whatgirlsneed.com. You can, you know, email me through the website or look me up, and I'm happy to sign books, send book plates that have an inscription for you or a young woman in your life, because I think this is something that we want to make sure we pass on to, whether it's a daughter, a niece, a granddaughter, or a colleague who you want to help inspire. So I look forward to hearing from listeners and making sure everyone gets their inscription too. I guess that's the upside of being on Zoom and remote, right? We find new ways to connect via the internet, huh?
Absolutely. And I think this book is, you know, this book can make a
Mm-hmm.
good gift that a girl can keep with her for a long time. And I can think of it. I don't want to minimize other gifts, but I would really love to give this kind of gift to someone, which you know, you don't know if she will read it or not read it, but in case she read it and it changed her direction of her life, isn't it's a small gift that can make such a big impact on someone's life.
Well, and I think that's what, you know, the Empowered Women series is about, what conversations like this is about. It's finding little ways to help nurture all the young women, or not young women, I'll speak for myself, right, in our life. Whoever they are, we know we need to help and look out for each other and look out for them. And so I fully agree that sharing stories, sharing advice is part of it.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of buying it for myself because
Of course.
I don't think, you know, as you said, I don't think it's too late to learn
Never is.
about courage, resilience, or boldness. And I'm going to buy it for myself and read it myself.
Well, your inscription is on its way. I look forward to it.
And last question, if there was one thing that we could do differently to bring more boldness in our lives, what could that be? Just one thing.
Pick one thing that you've been avoiding and lean into it. It's the practice of taking risk. It's the practice of, you know, building that risk-taking muscle memory that will make us all be bold. It's the next meeting you're at where you're realizing that you're not speaking up as often as you should. Practice. speak up once or twice. If you find yourself always saying yes to things when you really should occasionally say no because it helps protect your time and personal life, practice saying no. That's okay too. If it's negotiating for a salary or asking for a little more time off, or just admitting to your boss when you're overwhelmed, all those moments, they're small, but they're really big because they help us practice the act of taking risk. And that is the cornerstone of being bold and being our boldest self. So I think it's about finding one small thing and realizing that it's not small because it's the act of practicing that over time will make us all our boldest selves.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything that you talked about. And thank you so much for sharing stories, not only of your success, but also of your failures. And it's very inspiring. It's very inspiring for all of us. If one day there we do go to that one important meeting, we are going to start practicing from today. Because when I'm in front of President Obama, I don't want to not say anything.
I certainly hope not. And that's exactly what we're working for every young woman, every listener, every woman out there. So Purnima, thank you for hosting this conversation, and to all the listeners here, thank you for being part of it. I look forward to following up and seeing how far we get when we do it together.
Thank you. Thank you once again. And I want to just announce what we are going to talk about next time. And one second. I must have used this platform at least 50 times now, but it always is the challenge at this moment. Okay. So next time we are going to talk about, Dr. Porges, even like, so that you know why we are talking about this topic. Last year, a lot of our viewers asked us about viewers and audiences, listeners, whichever format, they asked us about financial planning. And a lot of women are very deeply interested in learning everything about finance, whether it is about making more money or saving more money or investing wisely, everything. So that's what we are hoping to talk about in our next live on Jan 20th. I think I got the date right, hopefully. But it's not next Wednesday, it's the Wednesday after. We will talk about financial planning. And you are welcome to join
I
us
look forward to it.
and give us some advice if you have any. And it's the same thing that we talked about today. The bottom line is, let's talk about money, let's talk about politics, let's talk about difficult things, let's make it normal to have a life of a woman.
Mhm.
And it's, our experiences are similar, our challenges are similar, let's solve them together.
That's a
And
great idea. Love it. Look forward to seeing that talk.
And thank you once again. And we cannot wait to have you again after we have practiced our skills. We will report to you how we are doing then.
Awesome. Look forward to it.